Hello and welcome to the Dissidents podcast, brought to you by the Institute for Liberal Values. This is where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. In this week's podcast, Elizabeth Spivak and Mike Burke link the rise of Donald Trump to increases in perceived prejudice overall, genuine increases in prejudice among MAGA supporters, and the feedback loop between Trump and critical social justice. Hello. So today we're going to do our usual thing, which is to cover a article. I'm looking up at my monitor, that relates to the kind of cultural wars things between, on the one hand, illiberal MAGA types and on the other, illiberal wokies. I think we're going to focus on the MAGA types today. So we're looking at a journal called Trends in Cognitive Sciences. And the question is, it's a very short paper, by the way, so very accessible. Did Donald Trump's presidency reshape Americans' prejudices? I have mixed feelings about this paper.
Elizabeth, that's what you said. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I mean, you had mentioned, I think that I think that one of your problems is, I felt like when I read your email, I'm like, oh, grasshopper, I have taught you well. You were like, you didn't say it this way, but you said correlation is not causation. I mean,
it's exactly what I was thinking.
Yes,
it's exactly what I was thinking.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they do certainly, I think, use, what should I say? Like they use sort of gentle, causal language. I agree with you. They are not, they do hedge the way, people in psychology do by saying may and might, but they still, are doing this sort of causal, they're building a causal case, I guess, is what they're doing. So, but they also, have their caveats in there where they're clear that, there really is no way, even with all of this evidence, which we'll kind of, briefly, sort of step through, that there's really no way to suggest or to demonstrate that that Trump was an actual instigator of attitudes, or whether potentially Trump's, rhetoric increased people's comfort with sharing pre-existing attitudes, or whether even at the attitudes that people, were more likely to espouse were even real attitudes, or if they were a product of something else. So, so they start out with some, with correlational evidence, and then they move to experimental evidence, and then some really big studies, like with 10,000 people in it. So they do start out saying that anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. increased 86% in the first quarter of 2017, which would have been immediately post-election, compared with the same time period in 2016.
Okay, so I have to put a pause there. Okay, carry on. Finish your sentence. Sorry.
Yeah, no, because I mean, I'm just, and then there was a 91% increase in anti-Muslim hate crimes in the same period. Now, here's the thing: hate crimes are extremely rare. So I actually went and looked up the actual study that they were citing here, and it was like, the likelihood of a hate crime in one of these given areas was like 0.0012. No, 0.0006. And then it was 0.0012 after the Trump presidency. So this is extremely unlikely. So yes, it's double, right? It's double what it was, but it is still extremely unlikely. So there is,
right.
Now look, let's not diminish hate crimes, no matter what they are. So, a doubling of hate crimes is still a doubling of hate crimes. But yeah, I mean, the likelihood that you're going to step outside, and either witness or be be involved in a hate crime is extremely unlikely. And frankly, the definition of a hate crime varies widely in different areas, even in within states sometimes. So sometimes counties, cities, they define things differently. So, there's that too. Crime statistics are a very imperfect,
So
set of data.
Two things to say about that. One is the definitions also tend to be very, very, very vague. So kind of like anything can be shoehorned in there, right?
Well, they're not all vague, but they're
but they
all
tend to
so
be
different. But they are
Yeah.
so different. And that's the same thing with rape statistics and assault statistics and everything. So it can, it's not just vagary, it's also difference. So.
And the other point I would make is, Will Riley's research, which shows that a very, potentially up to half of these complaints are fake. So, it's a very, very small number. And
half of which may not be real.
Significant portion of which probably is an actual hoax. At least a significant portion, let's say,
or an exaggeration, or an inappropriate use of the term. Somebody is offended, and so then
quite. So at least a significant portion of a vague and insignificant number is fake or exaggerated. So you're kind of clutching. I mean, that's kind of like saying, I don't know. It's not really anything in that, in my view. And also the other point.
And the original article really does do a better job. I mean, look, this is a trends in cognitive science. Like this is this is supposed to be a very brief report, right? So, but the original authors do a better job of talking about all of these sort of like caveats and stuff. Then these people are cherry picking.
Yes, exactly. It's a cherry pick finding, and also, it's hard to draw a causation line between Trump and rises in anti-Semitism,
and again,
because
in defense of these authors, they have not done that here. They have not done that at all. No, they haven't even done it a little bit. They specific. I mean, I could read. I mean, there's multiple sentences in here where they say, that they cannot draw a causal line. I mean, I should have highlighted them in a different color, but there's probably 5 or 6 sentences in this paper where they say this is not to imply causation. This is not, or we cannot draw a cause. I mean, here's one. However, they cannot tell us whether Trump's presidency led to a lasting and large-scale changes in Americans' expressions of prejudice. I mean, over again, right after they do the hate crimes, yet these increases in hate crimes, as troubling as they are, represent the acts of an exceedingly small proportion of Americans, and therefore cannot decisively tell us whether Trump's presidency affected the attitude. So they are not, they are building over the course of the paper, they're building their case, but they do. Even though there's few words in here, they are, using the few words allotted to them to say there's no causation demonstrated here. So I disagree with you.
Well, it's just worth pointing out that Trump was, probably the most pro-Israel president in living memory, right? I mean, he moved the capital to Jerusalem.
Maybe.
I'm not a fan of the guy.
I don't know that I can say if he believes whatever. I mean. I don't know that he believes anything strongly, anything. And so now I'm not saying he didn't do any pro-Israel acts, but to say that he was pro-Israel implies something that I'm not sure I'm willing to accept.
It's hard to say anything positive about Donald Trump.
Any motivation that is non-monetary is hard for me to accept.
Grabbing women by the pussy might be one.
Well, that's true. That is not a monetary motivation, but let's put it in the similar category.
I mean, he is an absolutely vile individual.
So then they say, a second body of research provides some experimental evidence And so I did go to look at these studies, and they did a little, one group of researchers did a study on where Trump rallies had been held and what happened, at or around those rallies. So that's the first one that they're talking about. One such investigation found that even brief exposure to Trump's prejudiced rhetoric, particularly those who personally supported Trump already, okay, were willing to express greater prejudice towards a minoritized group. So there's an interaction here. You have to be you already have to be a Trump supporter and get exposed to rhetoric, and then you're more likely to, now look, this is exactly what we found in the research study for which I got canceled, that people who were more right-leaning, when exposed to language that supported their pre-existing beliefs, were then more interested than in following up by saying, oh yeah, we should throw the bastards in jail. And that meant whether that was left-leaning and it was COVID infractions, or whether it was right-leaning and it was Black Lives Matter. Both sides, when exposed to rhetoric that would be typical inflammatory rhetoric for their group, were more likely then to express an extreme attitude. So anyway, I mean, this is along the same lines.
This is from a paper, The Acceptance and Expression of Prejudice During the Trump Era. I wanted to have a look at this, but it's behind a paywall. I can't get to it.
I could probably send it to you.
Okay, because that's an interesting thing to look at, because what kind of prejudicial things did Trump say?
So in these, so is this the Feinberg
what is the
one?
Examples?
Let me see. Let me make sure. Number 2, is this the Feinberg one? Oh no, this
yeah,
is,
because the one that is often used is the example of Trump saying at a rally that there are fine people on both sides. And he was, alleged to be referring to white supremacists, and that's kind of.
He didn't actually say that. He didn't say that at a rally. He said that, I think, in front of the.
Yes, that's right. Sorry, he said it somewhere. Anyway, it doesn't matter,
in front of the CIA wall of memory wall or something.
But it doesn't matter, because he said that there are fine people on both sides, and then that's where people cut it, because then he goes on to say, like in the next sentence or very shortly afterwards, and I'm not talking about white supremacists. So, Trump lies. He says a lot of vile thing about women, people with disabilities. But outwardly racist stuff.
Oh, come on. He stood up at one place and he's like, where's my black person? Where's my black person? And
I didn't see that one.
Oh, yeah.
But does that count as racist?
She stands up. I think if somebody said, where's my
gaijin? Where's my gaijin? Has been said to me. Gaijin means foreigner in Japanese.
Oh, okay.
And it's considered to be derogatory. And sometimes people call me that. I don't really care.
Then what did the wife of his finance person, I don't even know what his role was, but said something like, we're not anti-Semitic. We have a Jew for a lawyer.
So I'm going to push back a little bit on that. These are things that I would never say. These are really insensitive things to say. And I would pull somebody up if they spoke like that. But do they cross the threshold of racism?
But this is the point that they're making in this article, is that when someone of power, whether that's in your family and it's a parent who speaks like that, whether it's, when you go to school and your coach talks like that, or whether it's, when you go to college and your professors talk like that, or whether it's, more broadly speaking, and your president speaks like that, that your you feel more free to speak like that. So that's the point they're making in this article, that, having a president who expresses these kinds of thoughts, I don't even know that he believes most of them. He's saying them to get people riled up, because people clap. He'll say anything that'll make people clap. People are, it's, again, when it's sort of in the air that we're breathing, we start saying it too. And it's not much different, I mean, from the woke side, right? From, microaggressions and that kind of thing. So, am I suggesting that each one of these statements was racist? No, but I think one of the things that people say that they like about him is that he will say anything, and that they like that. These are things that they would like to be able to just spout off.
So to summarize what you're saying then, is what he's saying inherently racist? Well, there's no way of knowing. On surface value, probably not. However, what it seems to do is to create an atmosphere wherein people would be more comfortable expressing racist things than they otherwise would be. Would that be fair?
Yeah.
And you could tie that into research for cigarette smoking, for example, right? Couldn't you? Like, it's completely unrelated, but probably the same psychological effect. We all know that racism is bad, hopefully most of us. And we also all know that cigarette smoking is bad. But if you are hanging around with people who smoke cigarettes, you are then much more likely to smoke cigarettes yourself. And this is true for me.
And this is why cigarette manufacturers engaged in product placement in the movies.
Right.
So why? Because they wanted people that people looked up to be smoking. And it's one of the reasons why, the FDA and others fought back against that and tried to get it reduced, because people were, kids were looking up to people who were smoking and wanted to try it. And we're all, look, this is why we engage in fashion, why we purchase, jeans that have skinny legs and then jeans that have wide legs and stuff. It's like we all want to be, we're doing it mindlessly.
So, for example, for me, I gave up smoking around the age of 30. I used to smoke like a chimney before then. And I actually found it really easy to give up, because I had transitioned to being a university teacher and I wasn't going out so much. And I was surrounded by young people, the vast majority of whom didn't smoke because their generation didn't. And that's got less and less and less and less. But I will occasionally, and I might once or twice a year, have a cigarette. And you know when I do? It's when I go out with one of my friends who is my age, who hasn't given up smoking, and we're a few drinks in. And then I'll be like, okay, give me a cigarette. And I don't feel too badly about it, because it is like once or twice a year, and so whatever. But it is that kind of social environment, the social pressure that causes it.
Look at swearing. Like, I'm assuming that you don't swear in front of your kids for the most part. Occasionally, you might let one loose, right? But generally speaking, we don't drop the F-bomb, in front of our parents or in front of little kids. And yet, at the gym, all bets are off. On the playing field, all bets are off. But then that leaks into other areas of your life, right? So, that's really the case, I think, that they're making overall. They're not suggesting, and they admit that they can't know whether these were pre-existing or, just encouraged by Trump's freewheeling attitude. So the other investigation was exposure to Trump's rhetoric. Also this was a big study, just mentioning Trump's name. So having quotes that weren't attributed directly to Trump, ones that were. They had 6 different groups in the study, and just having Trump's name somewhere in the materials increased the likelihood that that people who were already Trump supporters would engage in or endorse, hateful rhetoric. So again, it was a combination. You had to already be a Trump, a Trump supporter in order to be affected by the experimental manipulation. But simply having his name in the materials seemed to be enough. So let's see. The other thing I thought was very encouraging, and I did go to this original resource also. Early work on this question provided mixed evidence from short-term effects on whether interracial intergroup attitudes and behavior actually, if people were becoming more prejudiced over time. And in fact, this huge study showed from 2009 to 2019, okay, over that period of time. So from 2009 to 2013, there was a steady decline in racism, in sexism, in
homophobia,
all of those. Yes,
yep.
2009 to 2013. Then from 2013 to 2017, it was pretty flat. And then from 2017 to 2019, another decline. So that would have been during Trump's presidency. That's overall, okay? But when you start to parse things out, you see a different pattern, which is, again, that Trump supporters were engaging in sexism, racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, at increased rates. But there's small percentage of people, and it's not conservatives, it's not Republicans, it's specifically Trump supporters. Specifically,
so can we
small number.
Can we pause on this point, because this is where my ideological knowledge comes in, and because I think this is very important. There is nothing conservative about Donald Trump and his movement. There is nothing conservative in the traditionally economic sense, which is traditionally how America has run its economy, which has been relative even to most liberal democracies, which defined by free trade or being on the free trade side of things. America is very, 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 very free trade. So there's nothing traditional about that. He's quite, he really wants to tear that system up, and start having huge tariffs on all kinds of things, which is traditionally a position that would have been associated with the left, and quite a radical one as well, especially in America, right? In the 1980s, that fallaciously, but it was that kind of argument in the 1980s that probably would have got you called commie. It's a socialist position, essentially, right? So there's nothing conservative about him from an economic point of view. From an institutional point of view, what him and his supporters, even more so than him, because his supporters, he is out of alignment with his supporters on so many things, and they worship him. But there's a jarring lack of alignment between him and his supporters on some issues, which I'll get to. But yeah, I mean, this idea that you just you drain the swamp, as he would call it, which isn't to say that Washington isn't a swamp. But the way in which you improve these institutions is incremental reform. That's always been the conservative position, right? Completely tearing everything apart and starting anew, that's a radical position. And again, something that would have been more radical left-wing, historically speaking, not radical right. We haven't had a radical right in America that has ever been like this. You could argue that the Nazis were a right-wing movement and they did kinds of things like this. Yeah, and they did. I'm not saying Trump is a Nazi, but it's certainly radical in a kind of a Bolshevik stroke national socialist way, if you think you're going to tear all these things down. So there's nothing conservative about that. And there's nothing traditionally Republican about that. I mean, what would Reagan make of all of this kind of stuff? And again, you don't have to like Reagan, but he wouldn't have had any time for this, especially not the government interference in the economy. So yeah, I mean, the MAGA bunch are not conservative. They're something completely different, and they're not Republicans either. They're way out of whack with what the mainstream in the Republican Party is, even to this day. And it's astonishing and frightening how such a radical dare I say, bordering upon revolutionary movement, all behind a man who hasn't had that much experience in government. I mean, he's had 4 years experience, right? During which time he managed to alienate the whole of the American intelligence apparatus. Pretty much every single person that he appointed, who then went on to say that he was a dangerous human being who should never be allowed anywhere near office, including Mike Pence, who claims that Trump tried to basically stage a coup d'etat and just didn't do it because he couldn't get away with it. So that's what the MAGA movement is. There's nothing conservative about it. There's nothing really Republican about it either. It's like saying that, I don't know, FDR would have had time for Robin DiAngelo.
Right.
I don't think he would. So yeah, I mean, there is something, and this is relates to a kind of broader kind of issue, that a problem that I have with a number of these articles, right? When you're saying you're describing people who kind of self-identify as liberal or conservative, and we're kind of putting conservatives and MAGA in the same box, and I just think that's not right. In the same way that I don't think that it's right to put communists and mainstream Democrats in the same box. Do you know what I mean? I don't think that radicals and moderates are the same thing fundamentally. I think that actually the moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats have far more in common with each other than they do the respective, Ilhan Omar, Donald Trump extremes of their own parties. I'll put Chris Rufo,
I agree.
Big Ron.
Big Ron. And I do think that that this, that's really the case that they're making here. So they had over 10,000. These authors actually do talk about their own research, and they had over 10,000 participants in 13 studies. So they briefly, super briefly, summarized theirs, and they found that beliefs in prejudice. Let me rephrase that. People in their studies responded that they believed prejudice was more normative. So they believed that other people were more prejudiced. Okay, that it was in various different ways, whether it was sexist, racist, all okay. They just believed that there was more prejudice. Okay, but both liberals and conservatives, to your point, most rated themselves as not prejudiced. So they believed they believed that there was more prejudice, but they rated themselves as actually low in prejudicial attitudes by various different scales over the 13 studies, except for one group, and that was Trump supporters. So again, it wasn't liberal, conservative, it wasn't Democrat, Republican. No matter which way they measured it, it was only people who were Trump supporters who were more willing in a survey to document, if you will, their own personal prejudicial attitude. And so, and the thing is, like on these surveys, you have to remember that even though, you promise people anonymity, or you tell them, that their identity cannot be, will never be shared, and the data will be, aggregated and all that kind of stuff, it's still very unusual for people to self-report highly prejudiced attitudes. Okay. So, I mean, we've included these scales on our studies over many, many years. And it really is only the extreme believers who will ever even, admit. Okay.
Yeah.
So because people, even if they have those feelings, they're still engaging in a sort of, social normative kinds of behavior, even privately on a survey.
Can
So
I give you an example?
know that for people to have expressed in this survey their prejudicial attitudes and to have endorsed Trump, these are the loud people, I guess is what I'm saying.
Can I give you an example? Like, because like my research is about ideology and national security and things like that, I need to listen to what these MAGA people are saying. I need to get inside their heads and understand where they're coming from. And so I listen to a lot of the kind of Steve Bannon stuff and all of that, because I not because I like the guy or agree with him, but I just need to know what he's thinking, right? Which is perfectly reasonable. And yet I have this extreme paranoia, even when I'm in Japan. Nobody in Japan would recognize the voice of Steve Bannon, of having it on and a headset on the train in case somebody thinks that I'm one
Maybe
of these
someone
kind of
will
MAGA.
hear.
Right. I'm really like, I put the phone in my pocket. I'm kind of like this. I really don't want anyone to hear me listening to that and jump to the conclusion that I'm one of these people. So yeah, I mean, that's the fear of that kind of thing. So you really do have to be ideologically extreme in order to come out with that kind of stuff. And they're his supporters, from the digging into it that I've done, his supporters are even wilder than he is. So, for example, there's a chap on Twitter, or now X, who is one of the most followed accounts on there, and I'm pretty sure is almost certainly an FSB stroke KGB, FSB is the new name, asset. And he calls his name's Jackson Hinkle, and he's got millions of followers, and he calls himself a MAGA communist.
Oh, wow.
And MAGA communism is now this kind of, it's become a very big movement, and it seems to be getting a significant algorithmic boost on Twitter. So it's a movement that they create these AI art pictures of Donald Trump with rippling muscles with a flag, or kind of like Soviet like propaganda with an American with a kind of Soviet uniform and a Union, and not Union Jack, Stars and Stripes. The imagery is really interesting. It's kind of like Soviet propaganda mixed with kind of American
like
patriotism.
shirtless on a horse.
Yeah, no, it's actually classier than that. Have you ever looked at North Korean propaganda? Like,
well, not that I know of. Yeah.
I mean, the content is vile, in every case, Soviet, North Korean, or whatever. But when I look at North Korean propaganda posters that are intended for domestic consumption, or Soviet ones, I mean, I can at least look at the kind of 1950s kind of styling that they have and admire the artwork, even if the message is absolutely vile. In the same way that I like Wagner, right, as a composer, he's probably my favorite composer, but he was a vile anti-Semite as an individual. So the MAGA communist movement is all about, let's get Donald Trump elected, MAGA, all the usual MAGA rhetoric. But then it starts to go on and argue specifically for the expansion of the Russian Federation, specifically for leaving Taiwan to the Chinese, and admiration of Xi Jinping, all that kind of stuff. That North Korea, Russia, and China are the leaders of the free world, and that the American people must rise up under Donald Trump. That's like what I'm seeing. And again, this is getting a huge algorithmic boost on X stroke Twitter. And I know this because a lot of the accounts, so allegedly, if you pay $100 or whatever to X, they will make you a verified account, which will mean that you get more views, allegedly. I mean, I've been shadow banned forever. Or, in the first case, because I started taking on wokies, and now I'm taking on these MAGA communists. So I'm getting throttled because of that now. I mean, this stuff is being like pushed into my feed constantly, and I'm muting these people. I keep a sample size of some of the more sane ones, relatively more sane ones, the ones that can actually string a sentence together, because most of them, again, to quote a Trumpism, they're not sending us their best. But they're literally being pushed into my feed, and a lot of them aren't even verified. And they've got thousands and thousands of followers, and they're just saying the most idiotic stuff. So look, I mean, I don't know what's going on at X. I'm going to say, I don't know whether X is now being run by a foreign intelligence service, probably the FSB. But I will say that if X was to be run by the FSB, this is probably what it would look like.
What it would look like.
It's crazy. It's crazy over there. It's got like, I would say it's as bad as it was when it was wokey, 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 but now it's just MAGA communist. And look, and the scary thing is we can then say, as you've said here, look, we're talking about a tiny percentage of the population. We're talking about a small percentage of probably even a tiny percentage of the Republican Party, right? But then again, the same was true with the wokies, always has been true. You look at the empirical evidence suggests that the alt-right kind of MAGA weirdos are roughly the same. They're about 7% of the Republican Party. And the wokies are about 7% of the Democrat Party. Yet both of these two groups are now steering the narrative, be it for the Republicans or the Democrats. And arguably, say what you like about Biden, whether or not he's corrupt, but I don't know. But he's a moderate, and he pays lip service to the kind of the squad type, wokey type, hardcore element that worry us, that have come after us, right? Whereas the Republican Party seems to be dominated by it now, albeit in spite of the fact that the vast majority of Republicans want nothing to do with it.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, basically, this article, they're summarizing, saying that they're not dominated in number by that.
No,
that's what they're making clear, is that they're not dominated in number. However, perhaps people, for example, Donald Trump, have given the small percentage a really large megaphone.
Yeah, and let me just draw attention to something really, really interesting. So, after Iran just fired off that massive barrage of missiles against Israel, half of which fell to the ground before they got anywhere near Israel, and the rest of which were intercepted by a combination of the Iron Dome system, Arrow, the RAF, and of course the US Air Force. So thankfully no damage was done. But, as that barrage was going off, and before that was made clear, these accounts, the Jackson Hinkle one being the most obvious example, were putting up propaganda saying, don't fuck with Iran, and look at all of this, and, celebrating this as a victory. While at the same time, or roughly the same time, Donald Trump over on Truth Social was saying in capital letters, if you fuck with me when I'm president, I'll blow you up, to Iran. Right. So that's like the kind of the ideological break between the MAGA communists who came to worship Trump and actually Trump himself. But in a way, it doesn't matter, because these people feel as though, the inconsistency, which is clear, just it's irrelevant, because these people feel that they're empowered by Trump anyway, even though what Trump says is completely the opposite of what they believe. It's a very, 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 it's very, very reminiscent of the woke, isn't it?
Yes, it really is. Yeah. So let's see. So then they're talking about, sort of what they're calling like mechanisms of prejudice. And so expressing prejudice towards certain minoritized groups was most acceptable in the week following versus the week before the election. So this was, and again, they'd say, you just don't know whether their attitudes have been altered or whether they're just, being empowered. But certainly the authors, again, are making a point that there's, implications of this. The question of which came first, the chicken or the egg, is really maybe not, it's an interesting question and, an interesting sort of investigatory question, but they're just arguing that it's really of secondary concern, because the primary concern is, whether who we elect as a leader will and maybe ascend to, as they say, sort of global power again, perhaps, is this going to amplify prejudice and maybe worldwide, because they do show evidence of it in other countries as well, including the UK.
The UK.
So they offer some evidence there. Yeah.
Brexit, and let me be clear, most people who voted for Brexit did not do so because they were racists. There are lots and lots of reasons to be skeptical of the European Union. Personally, I wouldn't have voted for Brexit, but there we are. But certainly, again, just because you're saying lots of nice things and you're voting for Brexit isn't an act of racism. And maybe it was the correct thing to do, even to vote for Brexit. Long term, who knows? So I don't feel that anybody should be criticised for being racist or even causing racism. But even so, it might lead to an atmosphere in which people feel more comfortable expressing views that they otherwise wouldn't have. That doesn't mean that that's your fault, that you've done anything morally wrong that you should be criticised for. This is where we draw a line between what the kind of critical social justice activists would say, right? You may have made it easier for racists to express their views, and look, that's not your fault. You haven't done anything wrong, but nevertheless, that may have happened. And certainly we see upticks in the UK too.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just going to say we see upticks in the UK too before Trump.
Yes.
So I think it's a global thing. And I think that Brexit and Trump are both symptoms of a wider problem in which I think I'd also say the Conservative landslide victory against Labour was another example of this. They're symptoms of a problem in which the white working class feels like it's been alienated, I think. And perhaps even white people more broadly feel like they're being alienated. And we're seeing like a kind of rush of white identity politics that are kind of filling in the gap, which is very, very frightening.
And they actually loop it back around, even potentially to sort of the wokeness, because at the end, they're saying, that, during Trump's administration, members of minoritized groups who felt targeted by Trump anecdotally reported expectations of discrimination. So, did he potentially create an environment where wokeness could grow because, we have a very few people who feel empowered to say things that they might have already thought, but giving them a bigger megaphone then increases people's fears that even though prejudicial behaviors and attitudes have been on the decline for so many years, it gives them the feeling that it's on the rise, and therefore, increases sort of this whole woke movement.
Well, I think so, and I think that and this is why I get kind of annoyed when people start saying Donald Trump, when he says insensitive things, that we put them down to racism, because that does seem to create that environment, right? It does seem to create that environment where we're saying, oh, look, he said this is a black person or whatever. It says something that's insensitive that I wouldn't say. And then we attribute it to racism. And then we say, look, here's this example of this great racist president. And then that gives people, oh, of course he's racist, which is the common response within the media, rather than what you and I would probably say, which is, don't know whether he's racist. He probably isn't. All he cares about is money, sex, and food. That's probably about and sleeping. That's probably about it, right? He's probably just a jerk, and probably too selfish to have a kind of like a fascist ideology, right? Because say what you like about fascists and they're evil and the rest of it, I agree, but they're also quite principled. I mean, you'd have to be the wrong principles, but principled nevertheless to be a fascist or a communist, right? You have to have a real strong ideological core. Trump doesn't have a strong ideological core. No. So when you're starting to attribute racism towards him, you are creating this narrative that, look, we've got this racist president, and the reason that he got into power is because of all these racist people. So clearly
Right.
we need to fight that, right? When in actual fact, the truth is that he's just a selfish person who probably isn't an idiot, and is quite good at public speaking, a vile human being, but that he resonates with people who have been alienated by who they perceive to be the elite. So what is needed to push back against this is a call for kind of moderacy, not like hysteria.
Right. Yeah. So I just thought it was interesting that the article is really about Trump, but then in the very end they actually sort of circle back around and say,
Circle back around.
By coincidence, your anti-wokeness may be actually increasing wokeness. Your and you wonder that about some of the other areas like Florida, like Texas, like are they making it harder for people like us to just live our lives? Are they actually making free speech, academic freedom harder?
So they are both wokeism and MAGA are victimhood seeking narratives. Right, they both seem to kind of cast themselves or groups that they want to stand up on as victims, and they both seek to redress a fundamental injustice in America and elsewhere, because it's not, we call it MAGA, but it's not really simply American. It's transnational because of the internet and things like that. They're both. I mean, you think about, what does the word woke mean? Well, it means that there are hidden systems of power that lie beneath explicit racism that perpetuate racial inequalities, and by reading lots of books or spending lots of money on training, you become woke when you make yourselves aware of them. That's what it meant before it became a pejorative, right? And red pilled is the same thing, just on the other side, or based even. Well, some people I like use the word based, but I really don't like it either. All of these terms seem to mean that you suddenly awoken to the reality, whereas the reality is that society is too complex for any one individual to understand, be they on their left or the right, and you can only understand your own institutions within which you operate, for example a university, to a very limited extent, and that you try to make incremental changes to improve them, but you don't do anything drastic. And so, both the woke and, to a degree, I mean, like some of the things that I think the woke have been correct about would be the use of casual homophobia, for example. Like, it used to be okay if your phone was something, in the early 2000s, if there was something going wrong with your phone, you go, oh, my phone is being gay.
Yeah.
That used to be okay. And now it's not. And, so that was kind of one thing that the woke have been correct about in changing language. Now, I don't agree with their methods, which is by saying just because you said something like that means that you're homophobic, but you shouldn't be saying things like that, right? It's not great. And I'm glad that the language has changed that way. Similarly, men in nightclubs used to be a lot more forward in the 1990s and the 2000s, I can remember, than they would be now. And that's a positive change as well. And a lot of that has been brought about.
The office.
I wouldn't know. I was never in the office at that time. I couldn't talk about nightclubs. But possibly. Probably.
Oh, yeah. I can attest to that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, attest then, right? So and again, that doesn't, perhaps the methods that have been used in kind of like Me Too, when you can just accuse anybody and believe all women, when people get falsely accused of stuff, and that's terrible. So there have been horrible actions that have brought about the present, but it is good that men don't go up and grab women's asses, for example.
Yeah. Squeeze your knees under the table and, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. And it is good that, I would never say that my phone is being gay if my phone's not working. So those have been, so again, there is a kind of side of reality that these people capture. Similarly, the people who would call them themselves red pilled. They would point out the inconsistencies in woke people, and they would say, look, mainstream liberals who think that these people are just, eccentrics whose hearts are in the right places, and maybe one person gets cancelled a year and that's terrible, but there's not really a serious problem. The red pill people who would say things like that also capture another side of reality, but neither of them captures the whole of reality. And but they both seem to think that they understand everything and nobody else does. And that's why, and their victimhood seeking morality, and that's what makes them kind of the mirror image of one another, and both as dangerous as the other. And what we're seeing right now is people on, I'm going to say our side, but I don't really think they're our side anymore. I don't. Who are now looking at people like Chris Rufo or Donald Trump and saying things like, well, yes, he does say some unsensitive things, and maybe some of his supporters, one or two of them, are racist. But come on, there's no real problem with these people. There are a few bad apples, but generally speaking, it's a positive movement. And, we can keep the bad apples in check and there's not going to be any problems. And if you are really drawing attention to the bad apples, look, I'm not saying that they don't exist, but why are you doing that? Are you trying to do that to empower the other side?
Right.
That's what we're seeing.
And again, we see that on the woke side too. It's like, right, if you're not 100% in over here, then you don't have to be very far away from the extreme left to be considered too far right,
right,
and to be called that.
So, I mean, one of the reasons I just don't use Facebook anymore, I've used Facebook since it launched pretty much, and I've always been a heavy user. And the first reason I don't use it was because of the wokies. And then I picked up loads and loads and loads of anti-woke friends from all over the world. And now they're on a massive purity kick as well.
Yeah.
They're red-pilled. Mike, I thought you saw it. I thought you were one of us, but now you're criticizing us? Where's your loyalty? What do you mean you're not endorsing Donald Trump? I never was one of you.
Right.
Never was. Mike, we have gay people, we have gays against groomers, but there is a conspiracy within the LGBT community to turn the kids gay. And thank God Big Ron is going to stand up for us. You're woke. I mean, you are woke. The right-wing equivalent of it. And just as dangerous. Yeah. No, not just as dangerous. And look, we've had to deal with these disgusting wokey people before in the past. But these people are more dangerous. These people, the wokies, the wokies have caused problems in the Democratic Party and they have undue influence within the Democratic Party. But they've never been in control of it. Biden is not woke. Right? He may pay lip service to things like critical race theory and all the rest of it, fine, but he's not woke, right? He hasn't acted in that way as a president.
Right.
MAGA, and by the way, MAGA this time round is different to MAGA last time round. It's a lot worse this time round. May very well get in control of American democracy. That means war in Europe. That means the American economy, God knows what will happen to that if he puts what did he threaten to put 20% tariffs on everything?
Something crazy like that, yeah.
The complete gutting of institutions, of academia, of, and a president who has said that he wants to hold on to power past his second term. Because he believes his first term was stolen to him, and one in which all of his closest advisors have said he's just dangerous and shouldn't be let anywhere near power. That's actually more dangerous than the woke.
Just like yesterday, I think it was yesterday, Bill Barr just came out and backtracked. So he's been saying Trump's unfit, and I think it was just yesterday he said, well, I'll probably vote for Trump. So, even, I mean, and I don't know what motivated that. I don't know why he would do that. I mean, they have, a year and a half or 2 years of him saying, this guy's nuts. He shouldn't be anywhere near the White House again. And then all of a sudden, like yesterday or a day before, he comes out and says, well, I'll probably vote for him because Biden is so horrible and the country is going to fall apart and all that kind of stuff if Biden is president again. So I don't know if some of these former, if his cabinet, I mean, I don't know if this is the first of his cabinet to fall. And, I mean, does Trump have something on this guy? I don't know.
I mean, just what has happened to the GOP? I mean, it's sad. I mean, it was like Labour being taken over by Jeremy Corbyn, right? But then it kind of recovered, and it's now under Keir Starmer, who I don't like either, but at least he's a moderate.
Yeah, it's not a grand old party, is it?
No, but again, the reason the GOP is called the GOP with the old is that's the kind of the conservative nature of it, the grand old party reveling in tradition, in American tradition. But there's nothing traditional about Trump.
No.
Yeah, he has more in common with a Bolshevik than he does Reagan.
I do think some people who think they're traditionalists believe that they can control things once he's in office. And that's what that Project 2025 is really about, is figuring out how to get the right people surrounding the stooge that will be the president. And they're the ones that are going to be running it.
Yeah. Good luck, chaps. Didn't work out that way last time, did it? Because all of the people that they put around Trump last time have turned around and said that they couldn't control him. He fired people on a kind of an almost comical, like at an almost comical rate. So he's probably not the easiest person to control. Yeah. Very scary.
I think when people have that sort of, that sort of childlike temperament, you can't control a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, really. You're barely hanging on when you have a 4-year-old in the house, right? And I think that Trump is just a 250-pound 4-year-old.
4-year-old, yeah, I can speak with experience here. Recent experience as well. To around about the 2 years old age is the toughest time of all. And then as they get to 3, they become easier. And by the age of 4, they should be socialized by the age of 4, more or less. If you haven't socialized them at the age of 4, then they're going to be even worse than a 2-year-old. But generally speaking, most kids get socialized are fairly socialized around the age of 4. Yeah, I mean, the longer you leave it, the harder it gets. Yeah, I don't have any problems with either of mine, thank God. No major problems anyway. Touch wood.
Okay, well,
all right. Well, thank you very much.
So we took on the other side today. So.
I think that really going forward, we need to be taking on the other side increasingly. That isn't to distract from the wokies being any less of a problem. They, the victories against them have been a few. That's wonderful, but they're pretty pyrrhic. Did you see the latest about Claudine Gay?
I don't know.
She's been appointed to teach research ethics at Harvard.
No.
Yes.
I did not know that. Oh my God. Okay then.
Yeah. We just thought that was wonderful.
Yes.
Oh my God. So yeah, the woke very much still are a problem. And they will continue to be. And I don't see You see, what would be tempting and what would be nice to believe was if, like, MAGA, okay, they're awful and we hate them, and the woke are awful and we hate them, but at least maybe there's the chance they might hold each other in check. And that's plausible from a logical point of view. But, you know, as you've kind of alluded to here, I think the opposite is true. I think they need each other and they feed off each other. And I think far from holding each other in check, what they will do is they will empower each other.
I
and that
think
is,
and that's kind of where this article ends. You know,
and that's what the Russians want, by the way. It's exactly what the Russians want.
Loop.
Yeah, and this is what the Russians have been doing with propaganda, is trying to play both sides. And, you know, and there's clear evidence of that in terms of, you know, you can trace the IP addresses back to Russian troll farms in which, you know, that are putting out Black Lives Matter stuff on the one hand and then putting out MAGA stuff on the other, and then organizing a Black Lives Matter protest next to a kind of MAGA rally so that the two sides are in conflict with each other. You know, so this is what our enemies are doing, because, you know, the likes of the Russian Federation know full well, as do the Chinese, although the Chinese aren't very good at propaganda. Russians are very good. They know fully well that they can't hope to stand up to America, let alone NATO, toe-to-toe in a fight. And so what they're desperately trying to do is to push these two agendas, wokies on the one hand and MAGA on the other. And I'm going to say something that I never thought I would say. Both are thoroughly un-American. Don't be un-American, Americans. Seriously, the thing, they both like hate America as it is, right? And the thing that I hate most about most Americans, not most Americans, the thing I hate most about Americans is how anti-American they are. Like, come on. You know, the Grand Old Party has a great tradition, as does the Democrat Party, and both of them have been working together in the greatest liberal democracy that has ever existed, as a continuity of English society. And it's something that is worth being proud of. And yes, there are problems, but again, they should be dealt with incrementally, as they have been throughout the entirety of American history. We know that works because we know where America is in the world in terms of its power and its economy and its cultural output. But these two sides, they are absolutely in danger of causing serious damage to your country, and they both feed off each other, which means we have to push back against both of them, not just one of them.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.